We're doing the button.
What's my resolution set at?
Yeah, I don't know what the detail is, but we're going to go with that and see how it goes. Let me let's see if I can fix some of this other stuff and kind of click.
Because I am set at high definition, baby. I'm better in high def.
Yeah, I don't know. Not quite sure what's going on, but we'll figure that out. All kinds of new stuff.
Take the summer off and they change everything.
I know, right? All of my little channels are rolling.
My channels are rolling.
So there we go.
I'm on my page. I'm live on my page. That's a new wrinkle.
I know. Either way, we're figuring it out. Like there's a few things have changed because we took a summer break. Terry's wearing his summer break shirt. So is it still summer break, Terry? Is that where we're at right now?
You know, I dress for comfort, but I'm really looking forward to today's fantasy football draft and just.
That's good.
Wait, that's a different podcast.
Different podcast. That's good.
Hold on, let me get some different show prep stuff out.
Get yourself the thing that looks like a Bible.
Yeah. I mean, if you want me to get a Bible, we can. Which one?
That's a different shop. That's a different episode.
Which Bible do you want?
Yeah. A couple of things. We will still be coming to the live station every week on Tuesdays at 11 Eastern, 10 Central. I'm never going to say standard or whatever daylight savings time anymore because I don't want to trigger Edwin. I'm just going to say Eastern or Central, and that solves the.
Listen, two things about that. I don't understand those times when it's what and what's when and all that stuff. And you're going to trigger Edwin somehow anyway. So
yeah, I want to do it intentionally. I don't want to do it unintentionally. So I think that's probably a blessing that we can kind of lean into. Is like, hey, we can purposefully summon the Edwin, trigger the Edwin as needed. And so there's going to be that. Also, we have a couple of new interoperabilities that we have going for this year in that. We can actually invite guests to come onto the live stream a little easier now. And those guests, if they so choose, like Terry is doing, can share the video to their own feed. And so Terry's people, if he decides he really wants to do that, will be onslotted with Tuesdays with whatever we're doing. I don't know. But it's certainly something that at least has some marginal value.
It does look like our chat function is not correct today.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a couple of changes that have happened with that. And I think I've gotten it kind of fixed back out for the feed. So it should pop up to some degree. And so I think some of that will work. Yep, there it is.
Yeah.
We had to let things resolve. And so I think a lot of this will work. So, hey, there you go.
There we go.
All there. It'll be interesting to see, this is a technical aspect, if we get comments from all of the various locations, because we're giving a test run to Twitter's version of this. I decided to be riskier. I joke at times that we were the most watched religious program on Twitch because we were the only religious program I'm aware of on Twitch. And Twitter is a darker place than Twitch. So we'll just see how this goes with some of this stuff. So we'll see how this permolates through.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Correct. A couple other things that we're going to try to accomplish this year. I do have a couple of guest hosts that I've kind of been thinking about. Terry might as well. He and I will discuss that in advance before any of that gets
that's
released. Good. It's a rarity. We'll talk about that in advance for that.
Wow, that's advisable.
Yeah. That means Terry actually has to think about it during the week and actually reach out to me. That's a different thing. We will also have some breaks. This is all structure stuff, holiday breaks and all that. And the season will continue till about the end of April, beginning of May, and then we'll see what goes on at that point. That's at least the plan. So folks have questions about it. As always, we are absolutely interested in the questions that you have about preaching, about congregational relationships and work, about related matters to spiritual contexts. Though our focus is really heavily in the space of the work of preachers, that focus requires us to be aware and invested in other things. And so that's all the announcement like level stuff that I had for the first few minutes of our conversation today, Terry. Did I miss anything that you thought was important, or is there anything you would like to add as our apparent host and color commentator and scholar in residence, according to the internets?
I don't know about scholar in residence. That you're the one with the degrees. I just have my AA degree, although it is proudly displayed over my shoulder. Yeah, no, I think you did good.
Right there too, but it's just not displayed. It's in boxes and folders.
Well, it's it's appropriate that the AA degree sits in front of the collection of lecture books, and there's also, I think, a FC mailbox change thingy right there too. It's all the FC things on one shelf.
Mm-hmm.
So
I kind of like that mailbox.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. Yeah. Speaking of FC, by the way, it's never going to be the same. The Do the Work daughters are down there doing the work.
I know.
Well, we think, I don't know that they're doing the work. We think they're doing the work, but we're not sure.
Yeah. I'm going to assume that they are engaged academically to some degree at some point during the week.
Yeah, this will be alarming for the Do the Work listeners who've been around for a while. For at least one of their classes, both of our daughters are at the same time in the hands of one Jared Saltz, which is a little frightening to us as fathers. But there you go.
Yeah, I'm a little anxious for all that, a little nervous.
Yeah.
But it's going to be okay, Terry. It's going to be all right. I think that's what I'm supposed to say. I'm supposed to say that. All right. So here's some things for today that I think are important. They're going to help us start and frame conversations. This is kind of a little bit of reminder space. I'm curious to see how far ahead Terry is on this one. About this time of year, this is the time of year when I begin. Some people wait till October, is when I start figuring out what next year's preaching looks like. This is the reminder to plan your preaching moment. And everyone's going like, I haven't even finished figuring out what I'm doing for this year. I've had so many changes I had to make over this week.
Yeah.
What's that going to be looking like?
Yeah.
And so this is just like a little thing to put on your to-do list. Like this is the time to start thinking about that. I think in October, we'll probably have a dedicated episode or Terry and I at least talk about what we're going to do. I'm going to think about maybe that's a great time for us to invite some younger men to the same episode. We'll have a bonus episode at that point where they can participate and give some different perspective. Maybe we can get an older guy to come in as well. Because as long as there's an older guy, we don't have to be the old guys in that conversation. And so if we can find someone even just a year older than us, we can solve our problems in life by just changing the scales a little bit. But this is the time to start doing about that. Think about thematically, think about textually. This is a great moment to go back in your archives for the past 2 to 5 years and say, what did I do? And ask the second question. Why did I do what I did? Like, why did we have this as my theme or the sermons of a block of time in that month? Was the need satisfied? Did I accomplish those initial goals? And so for a good month of time, for me, I'm starting to reflect on success and failure for goals. It doesn't mean I didn't succeed in the sermons that were preached. It means that I achieved the answer to the questions that I laid out. And I think that's a really great model for me, at least, to reflect and adjust for the next year. Because I don't know about you, but the church every year is different. Even if they're the same physical members and there hasn't been new additions, they, in theory, have changed. Your preaching should have changed you. We hope our preaching changes others. So that means that what you preach the next year probably needs to adjust in some way to be something different for the year going forward. What about you, Terry? How are you going to start that process? I know it's early-ish, but
well, the beginning of the process for me has already started from the standpoint of that I plan mine out in Excel, so that spreadsheet has been set up with all the appropriate dates plugged in. And one of my series will continue on from this year because we started studying First Corinthians together on one of our Sundays every month, and knew that that was not going to be done in 12 weeks, and it may not be done in 24 weeks because we're just moving through that at the pace that seems appropriate for what we're learning. And we're not out of chapter 2 yet. So, and that's also because I've missed some second Sundays, which is when that is. So that's an easy, right? So 1/4 of my sermons essentially are done at this point. And of course, I've added in the sermons that I'm always going to preach. I've got the date in for the Mother's Day sermon. I got the date in for the Father's Day sermon. I got the date in for the Thanksgiving sermon. Those things are things I'm always going to do. So all of that has begun, and like you, I've cycled back through and thought about the last 3.5 annual themes that we did. What are like one theme we focused on, and we tie that to our small groups discussion. And this year, that's been the follow me passages of the Bible and looking at discipleship and what that means. So like this month, we're in John 21 together with Peter's conversation with Jesus and what that means about all the things. And so that's been great, but now we've got to look and see, okay, where do we go this year? And that's where I'm at now. Some consideration being given to maybe the parables to do that, and maybe some value to do in the parables and the study of the parables, but I've not determined that for sure yet. So the process has begun because I think you're like this too. There's a lot of prayer that goes into that. There's a lot of thinking about things. I'll pick that up. I'll think about that. Then I'll drop it back down and go about some other things. And so that process began actually probably about 2 weeks ago is when that process started for me. Is start looking and going, we're gonna have this coming up, and before you know it, what happens if you don't? And I think this is the key too. The fall months are just seem busier than the spring for me for whatever reason, Phil. But we had kid drop off, and we've got kids still in school, and we've got other activities. I mean, my life is really, really busy with 3 kids anyway, and my mom and those things. But you've got the holidays are pretty constant here. You've got Halloween, then Thanksgiving, then Christmas. That starts off a really 2-month swing. It's pretty busy. If you wait till October, middle of October, to plan your sermons for next year, you're gonna get kind of bogged down, stressed out, a little anxious. You're gonna run out of time. My goal, by the way, and this ties into Trey's question. That's really something that me and the elders talk about more. But in a perfect world, by the middle of November, I have that list to the elders to consider and look at. And because if there need to be changes, I've got to have time. And with the holidays, that makes that tough because our elders are going to travel. They're going to be gone. They're good, and so you've got to or they've got family coming in for them, and that makes them busy. So you need to be mindful of that. We really just sit down, the 3 of us right now, and look at that closely and figure out what that is. Not really the congregation as much because, quite honestly, the 3 of us kind of sit down and figure out what track we think we need to be on. And now that doesn't mean the congregation doesn't come and say, hey, I wish you'd preach on this sometime. And that's all taken into consideration, by the way. But as far as especially I don't know about you guys, Phil, but especially our spiritual emphasis, like the one that we tie to our small groups, we really choose that based on what we think is best needed for the congregation. And so that's kind of the timetable. So if you've not, I would say if you've not started this yet, you probably need to, even if it's just the clerical work of sitting down and typing out the dates and seeing, because the other thing is which months have 5 Sundays, right? Now, I don't preach on the 5th Sunday. We use members to do that. But if you do, you need to get all that mapped out too, to figure out how that works. You need to figure all that out.
Yeah, and so Trey, for me, obviously the elders involved, I serve as one of them, and so that's kind of hard not to be the case. But even before I was serving as one here, um, the direction at that point was the elders gave me the big theme. They didn't give me the sermons. They didn't give me the topics. They said, "Here's your big theme. We want you to work that into your preaching this year." Was the prior process. This is your theme. Okay, let's figure this out together. Now, Michael and I, the other elder here, will sit down at some point between now and end of October and really just kind of say, I'll be like, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. What am I missing? What do you notice? What do we need to tweak here? Are there things that you've seen are important? And that goes in concert with the ongoing conversations that we already have. And so we're always talking about the work in ways that we figure these things out. Now, for me, I also proactively reach out to different members over the course of the year and to say, hey, is there something that you think you see as a need for you or your family or for the church? Let's figure this out and see if there's something we need to do in the Bible class teaching or the preaching or the home studies that can address that. And we'll try to figure out a purposed solution to it. Specifically, I try to reach into the young people's settings and listen to them. Disconnect you have from just kind of knowing what's going on day to day in those lives, because you may have kids yourself, but they might not be in the same settings as the other kids who are part of that group. The same thing is true for those in the workforce, those at home, those who are older. You got to reach out and have some positive interaction. And it has to be directed too, because if you just say, hey, if you got a topic, tell me, I'm going to tell you the answer for that's going to be 0. But if you go to someone specifically and say, hey, what do you think? And give them a good 10, 20 minutes of your time, you're going to get an answer from that conversation. And you can use it as a barometer to kind of check the pressure in that space. And so I would just say, hey, that's my process for that. And like, you want that feedback, you want that input, but no, it's never going to come back with the level of detail that you might need to put together your plan. It's probably going to be generalities. It's probably that calendar out. I'm using Logos like I do all the time now. All those dates are already in Logos for me. All of our Bible classes are in Logos, with everything. And I've got all that laid out. I'll kind of put together this week. Right now, it's like what I've been kind of doing is getting that all ready for us, for Eastside this week and for me.
In your planning, you also you just need to have some fundamental kind of requirements you do in your planning. And what I mean by that is, your theme may be a topic. And part of this is style, but I think one of the things for me is, and for us right now, it's 1 Corinthians. You need a textual study going on at least one of your Sundays. I feel like you need a study that you just take the text and move through it at least once a month. And I think that's really important. Those kind of things you need to have kind of as a foundational piece to your planning, Phil. Like even if I take, like for the discipleship, it was a topical kind of thing in one sense, but it was very textual. Every lesson was it from a text, and it was a text-based lesson where we just worked out of that text to find what was being said about following Jesus. And so even in that, it's really more textual. But you need to figure out, and if you don't have a series, you need to figure out, okay, how many lessons am I going to talk about the church? How many lessons am I going to talk about Jesus? How many lessons am I going to dedicate to the Old Testament? You need to have some of that stuff. That's how you find the balance, I think, when you start doing this planning. If you're not careful and you just, let's say you just set up, well, I'm just going to work through 4 texts once every, I'm going to do 1st and 2nd Thessalonians on first Sunday, and Ephesians, and then Philippians on the 2nd Sunday, and maybe the Psalms on the 3rd Sunday, and then I'll do 1 Corinthians on the 4th Sunday. Well, that's great, but now you've locked yourself into only textual studies. And what if something comes up that's not textual? There are some things that have to be dealt topical, like this. That's just how there is. So you need to And I think you do this too, but I always allow myself flexibility. There's at least 8 to 10 flexible sermons for the year that are left open on purpose, spread throughout the year, so that if
Yeah,
something is pressing, I have that option of doing that then. I mean, I always have that option, but for us, we advertise this series is on the first Sunday. This series is on the second Sunday. So there's a need to have some open spaces to give yourself
right.
some flexibility.
I do that in one of at least 3 ways. That flexibility. Number one, I don't schedule the fifth Sunday sermons. They could be guest speakers, they could be visitors, they could be members. I never schedule the fifth Sunday sermons, period. They are always left in that flexible space. Number two is my series that aren't the prime and the first and second tier series. They're not 12 sermons long. They are 8 sermons long at this point. And I do that to allow that sermon to float as the sermon series that gets interrupted by my travels. If I'm gone for a meeting, I've gone visiting folks, whatever, that series is the one that is intentionally built to be interrupted. And so it's kind of built that way. And then I also make sure that just like I do in planning for Bible classes, I try to stay balanced subject context-wise, context Old Testament, New Testament, subject, making sure that the things that are covered in these classes don't overlap with the things that are covered in these other classes. I try to balance this Old Testament, New Testament space. Where most of my preaching in those series is expository. So I'm going to be covering probably the entire work in those settings. So they need to have not only just a bracket, one Old Testament, one New Testament, but the subject matter can't be the same. It has to have some kind of buffer space in there. So I'm planning that too. And again, that's like right now. That's like a right now thing where I'm thinking through in this review. What have I done before, and why did I do it?
And my First Corinthians series becomes my floating series because it's not 12 lessons, and we said that going in. If I got to adjust something around, if I'm suddenly out on the third Sunday, then that third Sunday series lesson is going to be bumped to the second Sunday either that month or the next month to make allowance to cover that material, and we'll just move the Corinthians lesson further. You've got to have all that to say, you've got to design space for movement within your planning. And I think the guys that have a kind of heartburn with planning, that's one of the things that they get frustrated about. The idea is, well, if I plan out 52 lessons, then what if something comes up? Well, you don't plan out 52 lessons. You leave some open spaces in there for flexibility, and you can always move things around to deal with whatever needs to be dealt with. Yeah, and so I think it's really important to point that out, that you do that.
I'd also add, you're never pointing out 52 lessons or 104. There's gospel meetings, there's vacations, there's special events that you've got to plan for. And so it really minimizes the actual stress space for that locked in thing.
Right.
As much as I would go, hey, you don't need to be making your sermon choice Sunday morning, Saturday night. Sometimes there are events that happen during the course of the year that literally move you to need to do that.
Yeah.
And so you've got to have some level of plan actually ahead of time that when this happens, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this thing. And this thing is the sermon will bump one Sunday before, one Sunday after. This will become an important thing for this Sunday, and I'm prepared for it. And so giving all of this prep space here says that's okay. Like, you're good with that. And this sermon you insert now can fit into the holistic needs of the church so that they're getting satisfied. I'll add this. A lot of folks, for very good reasons, also make sure that they have a list of subject matter that they feel is relevant to the local church every year. I think that's probably a wise component to include. It's going to vary based on your region. Different communities and settings deal with different issues. And so make sure you're aware of that, and make sure you're not unduly biased against it because of the way that preaching can sometimes be. This is what I mean by that. Preachers are always trying to kind of keep a finger on the pulse of various communities. And so we then unintentionally share that pulse with other preachers we might know or other Christians we might know. But that pulse that we've picked up may not be the one that's relevant to our local church. And this is my long-standing illustration of this. If you're in a congregation that is not troubled by divorce and remarriage, notice I said divorce and remarriage, that means that you may not need 7 sermons that year on divorce and remarriage to maintain the status quo. You may instead need 7 sermons on marriage to make sure that you don't have to preach as much on divorce and remarriage. And so that's something that's important, even though other places may need a bunch of sermons on a subject. It doesn't mean that you need those sermons.
You need to keep your
finger. Be aware.
You got to keep your finger on the pulse of your community, which starts off with your local church. That's what's most important. And your local churches kind of make up the diversity of it. That's what really is going to help you structure what you're going to do. There are some things, that you need to cover every year, but I think that there's some things that you don't necessarily need to cover every year. I mean, I got asked a question recently about, well, how often do you talk about this topic? And I said, these days I don't, because we have peace in that area. And I'm afraid if I bring that topic up, we will no longer have peace. You can introduce division unnecessarily. That doesn't mean that we don't talk about things that, like you said in your illustration, talking about marriage would prevent divorces. If you're not having divorces, or you don't have people who can't remarry, then you just need to talk about marriage to prevent getting in those situations, rather than talking about something that's not an issue right now. And for me, and I don't remember how often you're preaching, but I'm preaching once a week. We have 1 sermon a week. That's just always been the DNA of this church. That was the DNA of this church before COVID, by the way. And that means every time I get in the pulpit is special and needs to be carefully planned out, because it's only once a week. I mean, I'm getting half the time that many other guys get to address whatever needs to be addressed publicly. So that's why planning is so crucial here, to understand the need to carefully plan these things out and to make sure you're addressing things in the proper way as they should be.
Yeah. And look, there's a concept in social media about ratioing, where you're getting 70 comments about a post you made and only 2 likes. And clearly that means that whatever you said isn't positively received. And so making sure that your sermons hit the appropriate ratioing space for your audience and what's needed, not how it's received, but what's needed, is super important. And so it doesn't mean you don't preach on divorce and remarriage. It just means that maybe you don't preach on it 7 times out of your 52 sermons for the year, or 104 sermons for the year, and realize, hey, maybe that's not what I need to do.
Or that you allow it to come up in the text of a study, rather than making a targeted sermon, which, by the way, is one of the reasons textual sermons are so good, is because you can address something without making it look like you've turned the pulpit into a weapon. A good example of that is we're in a study on the 10 Commandments on Wednesday night right now. Well, and I'm not saying we needed to hear about divorce and remarriage and all that, but guess what happens with the 7th command? You get to talk about divorce and remarriage because of the New Testament teachings about adultery and divorce and remarriage. So rather than coming out and go, today I'm going to talk about divorce and remarriage because y'all need to hear this, it just comes up in the course of a study. There's some wisdom to seeing things you need to cover and covering them by choosing the appropriate context of a series to approach those issues.
Right.
Which again goes back to planning, by the way.
Here's something else to consider. This is a related concept. I was in a conversation with one of the sisters at Eastside. She was talking about language studies. And her particular thing was, she listened to a family member talk about their learning of Hebrew for 3 hours and how excited they were about learning Hebrew. And in the end, she was like, I'm just not that excited about that. That's just not my interest point. And I totally get that. Like me, I love Hebrew. It doesn't mean that every sermon needs for me to then come back with that same level of excitable add-on because I'm interested in a thing. And so whatever your new interest in is as a preacher or as a teacher, make sure you don't overload the schedule of what you're doing to lean too heavily into this. I read a new book. Let me tell you about everything I just read. That's not going to be helpful for the group. It may be great for you, and we're going to talk about some of that over the course of the year somewhat as well, but make sure that that's not the only sourcing for ideas that you have. That's really part of this pulse. Language studies should inform your preaching and inform your teaching. They should not completely overtake. The same thing would be true of any other concept involved in the process of figuring this out. The last question, I think this is an important thing to think about, and it's super valuable, I think, at least for today, and it's tied into this comment. Think about what you're reading right now. Like whatever it is, we're all reading something. We're either reading our Bible on a regular basis to kind of reaffirm our concreteness into the text itself. We're reading maybe focused literature about something, maybe about congregational growth, maybe about leadership, maybe about the prospect of improving our presentation and becoming more effective communicators. Maybe you're reading some more academic stuff because you're trying to figure out some complexities of the text you never thought about before. Maybe you're doing that. That's super awesome. And if you got something that you're reading really exciting, put it in the chat for other people to see. I think that's a good, valuable thing. But also ask you this question: why? Why am I reading the thing I'm reading right now? It's as important as to what you read as to understand why you chose to read that thing. Are you reading it because it all of a sudden is popular and everyone else is reading it? Are you reading it to satisfy a need? Are you reading it because you think this is what you should be reading without any context? I know Terry's probably reading something. He actually always is. It's this little secret trick he has. He's always reading something somewhere. He likes to play it off and use himself as the court jester method. But I think it's an important question to ask. I know probably Terry's probably not reading a series of commentaries on Philippians right now because he's done with that process. He's probably happy to not be reading Philippians-based stuff. But what are you reading right now, Terry?
By the way, and Thessalonians.
Yeah. No comment as to what's going on with that.
Well, you might as well. I don't know that that's public yet, is it? They've not announced that, so probably no comment.
I just know that you read it.
Let's just say that there will be no Do the Work the first week of February.
That is accurate. I'll be otherwise engaged. But I'll add this, Terry, what are you reading right now? Are you reading, I know you had been looking at some other new books and you actually dug into some stuff, anything in the congregational growth space, which I know you read a lot about. I'm curious.
No, right now I've got some material to push out from 1st and 2nd Peter. So I'm reading 1st and 2nd Peter and connected works to 1st and 2nd Peter. So that's the emphasis right now. I was reading, there's a book on the 10 Commandments by Brian Edwards I read about 2 months ago because I had to push out that. And of course, I'm rereading that through each command as I teach it. So that's another kind of space. If you're ever wanting to look into the 10 Commandments, there's a book. It's available in Logos. I forget the name. It was by Brian Edwards on the 10 Commandments, and it's actually pretty good. Brings some pretty practical stuff up and some more modern application. G. Campbell Morgan has a 10 Commandments book. Problem is that's 120 years old. It's not got the same kind of modern application. So that's another book that I'm in every week. But the main focus right now has been in 1st and 2nd Peter, just to get that material ready to go for next quarter. Then after that, I'll be transitioning into some evidences material because I've got some evidences material. I'm teaching the high school class, but then more evidences material that I'm going to write for camp, more than likely for next July. So that's going to be the next space we move into.
Yeah. For me, I'm reading a lot of stuff involving probably the least taught text of the Old Testament. First and Second Chronicles, or the work of the chronicler. And so I've been reading a lot about that. And I think it's
is this for school? Is this a class that we're in? Is that what this is?
No, I'm teaching that at Eastside.
There you go.
So look, if you go at my school boring list, I can certainly list all those books out, but those are all across the space of different things. Some of them are really interesting. Some are pretty heavy. And I don't know. I think Lamentations probably gets talked about, at least more generally, than the work of the chronicler, which I've actually listed it as my third favorite Old Testament text block now is probably the
Well, we don't need Chronicles, right? We got 1st, 2nd Kings and 1st, 2nd Samuel. So what's the need for Chronicles? It's just redundant.
I'm going to argue in favor of the opposite of that being the case. Yeah. And in fact,
but I mean, that's what we think is my point. Yeah. It's kind of tongue in cheek. Is like, why did he put this book in here to re-say these things all over again? Like, until you realize there's stuff. It's kind of like the Gospels. Really, there's some
a
focus difference,
syncopation, synoptic effect to it.
But there's also things missing from each other that you only get the full picture when you kind of put them together. And the purpose of the books is different, correct, Phil? The purpose is different.
Yeah. One's more propaganda than the other.
Yeah.
Which, interestingly enough, if you think about it, the more propaganda one probably is better suited for younger students. It has a lot less detail in some settings. So, but we don't do that. We actually then just overly soften the ones that are much more complicated and weird. Anyway, so I'm reading a lot about that right now. In particular, some great commentaries on that. The Brazos series on the Chronicles texts. I'm also trying to dig through some new approaches to communication. I'm working through a couple of books on the process of explaining things more clearly, which is part of the work of preaching and teaching. I think into the heart of things is really getting more effective at that. One of our friends, Shane, I think is incredibly competent in that area, where he can take the most complicated things and provide for a good thick message, but make it understandable to a wide bracket. And so I think that's a skill that all of us need to get better. That's what I'm investing in over the course of the next 12 months or so, is getting better at that single thing, which is taking heavy messages and making them simplified. So that's what I've got going on. And the why is pretty practical in that regard. The other why is because someone told me to read those. I'm required to read those things. But that's all I've got for today. Next week, we'll be coming back and continuing with our series of conversations, doing some stuff, doing the work stuff. Terry's got a last comment here. He gets to get the outro today. So,
well, this goes a lot with what we just kind of put these two things together. On my desktop, there's a folder called Ideas. And just a reminder for preachers out there, you need an ideas folder. As you read things, there are going to be things that pop into your head. Oh, that will preach. Open up Word or Pages or whatever, type out your thought, put it in the ideas folder. And you build up your ideas in that folder so that when you have those flex spots in your planning, or maybe even when you're planning, you open up that folder and you go, oh, here's something that'll preach. You need to collect in a place that you can, by the way, this got a lot harder when I got older. I didn't do this when I was younger. So now that I'm old and I have all the old age issues coming on, you're going to forget things. You need to have a folder that's easily found. Maybe it's your notes on your phone. I know a lot of guys do that, but you put that into the folder for ideas and you pop that open, and that's where you have all these different things. Just really key part of your planning. That also allows that, let's say you got a flex spot and it's Tuesday morning and you're in your office and you have no idea what you want to preach. Open the ideas folder. That's why you have it. And find that nugget that's the seed starter for your sermon when you get into that spot. But you need an ideas folder. Make sure you do that.
Yeah, I use Apple Notes for that. And so I can share into those notes PDFs, websites, notes of me writing out sentences or even outline structures. And so that's where all that exists for me. And I make a new one every year. And I don't get rid of the old ones. They kind of just float deeper into the folder list. But that way they're there. I can kind of go, and if I use an idea, I remove it from the folder.
Right.
Because I've used the idea, and so then it goes into its completion space, which is again back in Logos.
Back in the day, it used to be an actual folder with printed off pages of blogs, articles, handwritten notes. You would pull those things out. When you got done, you'd wad it up and throw it away because that idea was gone. Do the same thing. It's in your idea folder. You use it, you delete it. You know, that's just how that goes. Because then that idea became a sermon, and you've got that stored somewhere else in a different folder. It's a completed idea now. So, but just make sure you have that folder. Make sure you have it set up so you can have that moment when you need it. Oh, here's my idea. Here's my thing.
Terry, any last tidbits for this year? Things that are important to you? You're the last outro.
Somebody brought up that you thought we were gone. Like you told in the text, we're not gone. We just take the summer off. We're busy. We got a lot going on. We got kids. We got family. We've got vacations. We've got all kinds of things. We both had kids moving to Florida this year that we had to take care of. And all of those things together, just the summer's our time to refresh, re-energize. And any work like this, deserves a break from now and then. So we're back, and we'll be back. There'll be a few little places where we'll take time off. We'll both be down in Florida that week in February at the lectures, so we won't be broadcasting. But if you're down there, hopefully we'll see you. And we got girls down there that we're going to go down and we're going to study, but we're also going to be able to be with our kids and enjoy our time with them. So I'm pretty sure both of our families will be down there with us this year. I think my whole family is going for at least a couple of days. Not sure what about yours, but I'm sure probably. And so that'll be good.
Yeah, I'm going to throw this out there. And we got our first Twitch comment of the week. Hey, what's up? I don't know who you are, but we're glad you're here.
That's it.
Yeah. But I wanted to mention this, especially for the younger ministers, younger preachers, younger workers. If there's something you can do outside of academia to improve your preaching and teaching, this is it. Like, you can go back to school, learn languages, learn how to work through things better. That's super good. But if you can go to Israel and spend a couple weeks there learning, there is little you can do in that short amount of time that will improve your ability to teach than this. And I know Paul could talk about this. He was a recent traveler himself. This is a tour that is being led by Luke Chandler. Luke is leading another tour this next summer. This one's unique in that it will be in concert with Hutchinson Bell, and John and Vivi Weaver will be on the tour. John is the incoming and current president of Florida College. He's an academic himself. Luke has graduate level education in history and archaeology, and it is a rich educational opportunity. And you say, that's really expensive. It absolutely is. And so I encourage you, especially if you're a young preacher, to start talking to your elders. Maybe they can help with the cost, and that's something that is really, they're investing in the future of a local church because they're investing in you. And so I'll probably mention this a couple times more throughout the course of the year, but go. I will not be on this tour. I don't benefit at all in any way from this personally, but I think it's good for you, and it's good for the churches that you're part of to gain those skills. That's it for today. If you have any questions, if we can encourage you or strengthen you in some way, just let us know, and we'd be glad to help.